I'll just start by introducing myself and then we'll sort of crack on from there. So I was a high school teacher for 20 years. I was a phys ed teacher in northern suburbs of Duncraig Senior High. I taught there for 20 odd years. And before that, 17 years, and before that I taught the Northwest at Port Hedland. So I was a high school teacher for a very long time, phys ed teacher. I was the athletics coach at the school. Selector, organiser, chief cook and bottle washer, doing all those things, and we did quite well. We got up to A grade, and when I was there, and we did pretty well. So I've actually got a natural affinity around dealing with athletics. I've had a very long involvement at a sort of high school level, so I think that's something that's important for me. So I was a phys ed teacher for 20 years. Then so I got a few sort of letters after my name. I did a master's degree in sports science, and then I went back and did a PhD. So I'm going to talk to you today in sort of my clinical psychology hat on. I'm a clinical psychologist. I've been working there for about 10 years, but I've also done high performance athlete stuff, working in high performance since mid-1990s, and worked at the Institute of Sport for a couple of years as well in a performance role, not in a mental health role. So that's kind of a bit about my background. Also, it's very important today for me that you guys, this is interactive. I don't want this to just be a chalk and talk session, you know, like back in school, let's go stand up in front and just talk. If you've got questions at any point, please stop, because I'm curious to see what people want to get out of this stuff, because I've got a bit of a brief. I'm going to talk to you specifically about two particular issues. One is, what's the role of the non-mental health professional in this area around dealing with mental health and well-being? That's kind of where my starting point is. The second point that I really want to work to is also around about what can coaches do to actually promote mental health and well-being in this quite crazy world at times we live in around social media, etc. stuff. You know, so there's a lot of stuff that young people get exposed to. Also, a lot of our young people, there's a lot of helicopter parents around these days, and so our young people don't actually get a chance to develop the life skills, resilience skills, to actually navigate the challenges that come their way. So there's a lot of factors. At the end of the day, you've got a bunch of kids that you coach, right? They're going to rock up on your doorstep, and you've got to work with them. So today, those are the two broad areas I'd like to chat about. If you want to talk about a particular experience that you've had with a particular athlete or whatever, please feel free, but please don't name the athletes, etc. I'd like to hear case stories and case studies, etc., with how people have coached, managed these particular issues. But please just make sure that you don't disclose names and all those bits and pieces if you could. Before we start, I've mentioned two things I want to get out of today's session. That is, what's the role of the non-mental health professional in the context of mental health, and also how to promote mental health. How can we help in that area? Has anyone got questions or things they'd like to raise right from the very beginning about what they'd like to get out of today's session? You don't have to, by the way. But has anyone got anything that they'd thought, I really wanted to get some info on this X, Y, and Z? Yep.
Sorry, I was a little late.
That's all right.
I have a big concern for the really good junior athletes that are just the next thing since Usain Bolt.
Yep.
And some strategies to deal with how they lose.
Okay.
Because they're eventually going to lose.
Yep.
And how do we keep them in the sport just long enough to actually come out the other end?
Yep. So just so everyone heard, it's around about helping athletes, young people in general, navigate the challenges of not coming first. Because often when you're dealing with a good elite athlete who's really used to coming first all the time, eventually they're going to hit that wall. Or in other words, they're not going to be the big fish in a little pond, using that sort of terminology. How do you navigate that? It's a really good question. It's a very, very good question. And particularly, in this atmosphere where, you do hear stories where we don't allow our kids to fail. And that's not just a school issue. This is where you hear you hear stories about parents doing their assignments for their kids in primary school to make sure they pass. You know, and so we've got that issue, and then we've got the issue that at times perhaps, particularly say year 6 and 7, at some point you've got to stop giving certificates for everything. So there's a transitional point. So there's a couple of school factors, there's a couple of parental factors, which all add up at the end of the day. When this kid rocks up to you, and they're not used to it in some way. Now that'll be partly personal. Some athletes that's okay, they can roll with that. But also we'll talk about some of the environmental factors that we can make a difference to perhaps facilitate that process. But that's a really good question. Anyone else got, and if I forget about it, can you catch me and say, Craig, don't forget to talk about this? Any other things? Yep.
Just managing burnout. And
good, thank you.
I guess it's kids that compare themselves to other athletes and they go, oh, such and such is doing 6 spoon sessions this week and
yep.
I'm knackered after doing 3 or 4. And saying it's okay, that's all right.
Yeah, so managing athlete burnout is a big one. You know, I saw it as a lot at high school. Like I started the triathlon program at Duncraig Senior High, and we talked about like commitment and how much they do, and they've got this and they've got that, and what are school coaches making decisions about that actually put them at risk, and whether they can be understanding or not. And particularly year 12, like year 12 is a cracker. Like you've got the really good kids, they're in the athletics team and they're also in the swimming team and also they're in the netball team or whatever, and they've got a thing called year 12, right? And getting the balance of all of those commitments is not an easy process. And some people say, well, my stuff's more important than other people, so I'm not gonna back down. It's like, whoa, okay, right, interesting. How do we navigate? And particularly when you can, it's not too bad, particularly if it's in one department, so phys ed department, and we can all make decisions as a group. But what happens if you've got a phys ed department, then you've got the coach outside, then you've got the waste coach, and then you've got this coach. Not an easy process, not an easy process. But I think what we can do is a good sports psychology principle, focus on what you can control. So we've got to focus on making your own decisions and how you manage that. But again, we'll come back to athlete burnout because that's actually one of the reasons I actually got involved about 3 months ago. I got approached by Athletics WA to actually start talking about doing some work in this area around about how to manage burnout, because it is, particularly for the really good kids, it's a definite risk factor. So athlete burnout and also dealing with how to navigate coming second is something we're going to talk about. Anything else that people want to talk about?
How injury affects
injuries, yeah, coping with injuries, yep, that's a really good one, and how to manage that. Yep, down the front.
In a case study perspective,
Yep.
female 14 to 15-year-old that had a negative experience at a state level,
Yep.
that's now who'd been referred to a sports psychologist with some other issues also.
Yep.
But on my conversations with the sports psychologist, I've been encouraged to create pressure situations at training for this child, which sounds great when you're having it in a conversation, but then translating that to an actual thing that you do with a fairly fragile human being.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's how to manage that process around about when someone has perhaps gone into a not a good space. How do we then help them come out into a better space? And I think one of the key things we'll talk about in that just is it's a teaching strategy about how to scaffold that experience, how to do a step-by-step process. But it's an interesting one. We'll come back. If I've forgotten about it, please harass me. Okay? Cool. So let's start with the first question. I'm going to try and weave these discussions that we've had into our talk. Okay, so let's start with what exactly is mental health. Now, where we're starting here is this. Again, we're starting with this idea of you guys are not experts. You're a non-mental health professional dealing and navigating this territory at times and how to navigate with that. What we're trying to do with the first couple of slides is to give you an understanding of some of the factors that go on so that you're a bit more informed as a non-mental health professional. And a bit more informed, and also that with greater understanding, sometimes with greater understanding that we can help better. So just a couple of things. Traditional definitions around mental health, we've always focused on disorders, depression, anxiety, trauma, etc., and have these wonderful books that define what those criteria are, etc. And it's always been a problem focus. You have a series of problems that stop you from doing X, Y, and Z. Okay, and we'll call that a disorder, etc. And it's a what we call a deficit model. You have a problem area. There's a deficit in some area. And you know, these ones: bipolar disorder, gambling, autistic spectrum disorder, etc. So you can see this is how that's the traditional definition. And you'll hear these sort of figures, prevalence rates. About 1 in 5 Australians over the course of their life will experience a mental health disorder in some form. And about 1 in 7 children between the ages of 4 and 17 will have some form of mental health disorder. The little tricky figure here with the kids particularly, it also includes things like ADHD and autism spectrum disorder, so you'll see actually probably a reasonably high prevalence. Not all kids, young kids, are depressed and anxious. There's actually a bunch of other things that are going on with there as well. But it's an interesting thing to think about, particularly if you've got, say, 1 in 7. If you've got a squad of 28 kids, hypothetically, there's probably 4 of them, on average, that there is some form of mental health issue going on in the background, which is quite challenging. When you start thinking about it, it's like, oh God, there's a classroom teacher. I had a classroom, I had, say, 32 kids. And I would have more than that, phys ed teacher, probably 14 of those, right? So there's 6 or 7 kids in each of those classes times 14 classes. It's like when you start thinking about it that way, it's kind of like there's quite a few kids that are actually in this particular zone. And so we talk about this. Why it's important to talk about this is just to be aware this is not the aberration. It's actually the norm. You will see this. This is quite common. And so it's quite common. It's important then to be aware and know how you manage it, because in the past, what we've tended to do is kind of, no, that doesn't really affect me. I'm not going to be affected by it. And we just ignore that stuff and they'll be okay and they'll get by. And it's quite a common mentality in the past. But I think what we're trying, when we put these figures up, it's important to say it's actually quite prevalent. We see a fair bit of it. Probably not stress. It's prevalent. It happens a fair bit. It's a bit like saying there's quite a few kids that you've probably got asthma. So we therefore need to be aware of that. Other definitions, though, are a bit broader. I think this is probably a bit better. We start thinking about what we call continuum definitions. So we talk about that at one extreme, at one end of the distribution of things, we've got a mental health disorder. At the other end, there's this really cute word called flourishing. Okay, people are flourishing. It's kind of like, does anyone know who anyone's flourishing? I seriously don't know anyone who's flourishing. So it's almost like an aspirational goal. But it's this idea that we've got 2 ends of the continuum, and in the middle we've got this thing called languishing or struggling, and then this thing called moderate mental health. So basically we've gone from 1 category to 4 in terms of defining well-being. And this is probably a much healthier way of looking at things. We're actually dealing with health, mental health and well-being rather than disorder. Okay, and that people will, at different points in their life, oscillate between these different areas, and we'll say they're a bit longer than others. Also, when we're talking about this area, we're making this is not just a feeling. So sometimes I feel down. A feeling is not a problem. If, however, because of that feeling and it lasts more days than not, and let's say for traditional definition is about 14 days, more days than not for about 14 days, and that impacts on your behaviour and you stop going out and you start withdrawing from things, then we're starting to see you're getting into that zone. Okay? But it might be taking a few days to head down, or a few weeks or a few months or a few years to head down that scale from perhaps moderate mental health to perhaps languishing and struggling to perhaps a disorder. And it's mood, it's long term. It's more days than not, and it's also about the distress associated with it, and it's also impacting on functioning. So there's a bunch of factors that we take into account It's not just the odd feeling or two. It's also, again, putting stuff up so you understand a bit better. How do you define the difference between languishing and disorder? It's not easy. Really not an easy thing sometimes to work out. You can kind of see someone's really struggling, right? But have they reached that point where perhaps they really need to go from beyond self-help and reading books to actually going and talking to someone? It's a blurred boundary, but it's one that you need to be aware of, because eventually you might, if you're talking and we'll come to this in a minute, you know, for example, that you've got an athlete you've been working with and their mum and dad are split up, right? We need to watch, because they might decline quite quickly or slowly from that to in this zone, okay? So it helps you understand people's progression in their well-being, quality of life. That's why we put this stuff up here, so that you're a bit wiser, so where you can watch people and see, yeah, no, they're going really well, even though their family is split up. They're actually still going pretty well. Okay, sweet, that's all right. But I've got a sense of that. Whereas if I see a change in their behaviour, and I'm starting to see down that path, it's like perhaps go a bit beyond just watching. And we'll talk a bit more about that in the second half. No? Yeah. Actually talk about one of the exercises we can do in a minute is actually along that sort of line. Okay, so think of this. Mood is, feeling is in the foreground, mood is in the background. So I might feel really sad because West Coast Eagles didn't make the finals, okay? Yeah. Whereas, and that will pass pretty quickly, and then I'll sort of rebound pretty well, and I'll end up going, oh yeah, whatever. Okay, well let's go out tonight, let's have a bit of fun. So I don't stay in that down experience. But if in the background, and I'm kind of pretty flat, you know, pretty down for long periods of time, and it's not just related to a specific event, it's actually in general, and it's actually going for probably a few days. You know, there's the odd spike where you get a little bit of feel a bit better, but it's just, mood is this long-term background of experience. Feelings are very event related. Okay, so yeah, does that answer your question? Yeah. So it's a difference between feelings and mood is a very important one, because sometimes the two go hand in hand. So for example, if you've got an anxiety disorder, having a panic attack, the feelings and the mood will be pretty much the same because it's such an intense experience. Same with trauma. Whereas depression can be slightly separated from each other. Any other questions in that zone? It's a good question. It's one of the core understandings in this area. Just a brief comment. The idea here is we're trying to normalise mood, normalise behavioural responses, because yeah, everyone gets a little bit anxious. Like I'm doing my presentation today, I felt anxious because I don't know you guys. I haven't done this, I've only done the second time I've done this presentation. I've done variations on it many times. But so it's new, and this is a new group of people. All right, so I'm feeling a bit anxious, 100%. But am I so anxious that I didn't actually come? Okay, now we're starting to head into unhelpful behaviours, that I can't manage my anxiety. In fact, I avoid situations so I don't get anxious. Then we're starting to head into something that's not healthy. So it's still, most people don't understand that in the area of mental health and wellbeing, it's still behavioural. Behaviours. You've got to observe behaviours. And from those behaviours, we then work out what the hell's actually going on. So my avoidance behaviour, probably we'll look backwards and say that's actually, okay, I felt anxious. In fact, you couldn't even face the anxious, you avoided the thing. And of course that has lots of, if I hadn't turned up on here, the word gets out, and well, he's not very reliable, is he? Blah, 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 blah. It has consequences for you. So it's very much around about working out this normal experience of anxiety, but that actually at some point it becomes really quite problematic. Same with stress. We all need a certain level of stress. We talk about the difference between eustress, which is positive stress. We need a little bit of stress to keep us excited. And then we talk about the other end, which is distress, when the demands on us are greater than our resources to deliver. We will experience a thing called distress. So the word stress, if I could scrub that from our vocabulary, I'd be very, very happy, because if we only talk about eustress, distress, now we've got something useful to talk about. But stress, yeah, I will need a little bit of it, but you don't want too much. So it's eustress versus distress. But it is, this is to try and understand the difference between some form of normal experience, whatever that is, versus that continuum getting down towards the other end. Oopsie, going backwards. Now I put this slide up too, because we've got to understand that actually the areas around mental health are really complex. I'm not going to go through all of this stuff, but if you can remember this, if I want to understand a bit about mental health, it's about how the person deals with the situation. How the person deals with the situation at different points in their life. I, as an individual, this has happened to a couple of friends of mine, have lost their job in their 50s. All right? Now, losing a job in your 50s versus losing a job in your 20s is a fundamentally different experience. So still losing a job is not an easy thing. No one likes to lose, well, most people don't like to lose their jobs, all right? So, but me at the stage of life, let's say I'm genetically predisposed, like for example, I'm perhaps a base level introvert, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I lose my job, and I lose my job in my 50s, I'm highly at risk of some mental health disorder, all right? Highly at risk. Then we also start doing things that actually start to perpetuate distress. Right? For example, I said earlier on, I start avoiding things. The more I avoid, the bigger problems begin. But some of these factors are risk factors. Some are very protective. I have some protective factors. So we do some research in resilience, and we say there are 3 broad areas of protective factors. One is my personal protective factors. For example, I might have great self-regulation skills. I might be able to really manage stress really, really well. The second level is my connection to peers. Have I got a good social group of people that I connect to? Right? The third one is family or family sort of structure. Right? If I've got good family support and I've got a good bunch of connection to peers and I've got my own good personal resources skills myself, then there's a bunch of really good protective factors that might be able to help me with even the most stressful situation. But even then, there's limits to that. So I put this up there so that you've got a greater understanding, compassion, and sort of willingness to help in the mental health area. It's complex, there's a number of things that are going on, but if someone presents to you and says, I've lost it. I just lost the urge. I'm really struggling with this. Keep this in the back of your mind, but keep it simple. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I want you to, if you want to have some compassion, you've got to understand there's a lot that's going on in terms of developing mental health and the nosediving of well-being. Questions? Any questions there? Okay. So, what do we do? So we're kind of getting a sense of what's going on. What do we do? How do we do with this thing called helping? Well, the idea of helping at some level, people are willing to help if they understand. If they're dismissive and they say, it's all mental health, it's all bullshit. You know, it's all rubbish. You know, back in the day, we just put up with stuff and we soldiered on. I'm willing to help. All right? So it's having understanding and compassion is the fundamental that underlies. Okay? That's what our starting theory is. So what do we do? starts with awareness. It starts with, it's interesting, I listen to I'm a bit of a AFL footy nut. Footy cricket's my original background. And I listen to coaches, ex-coaches who have said, oh yeah, I play X, Y and Z. Yeah, they end up having some mental health issues and I had no idea. Nah, don't buy it. Don't buy it. It's almost certainly there will be some indicator. There will be a change that you will see. There will be something going on. It might not be related to a stressful life event. It might be. It might be mum and dad divorce. And therefore, and this is where we're a bit biased. We're a bit more, if we see an event and we see mood decline, we go, oh, you got that. Easy, sweet. But often it's not as simple as that. Really not as simple as that. So yes, we do need to keep an eye on them. And we talk about injury, going back to your question. We have, stressful life events, for example, mum and dad divorce, or stressful life events, they're rejected, they're experiencing bullying at school, right? Negative life event. Mum remarrying, negative life event. Dad's remarrying, negative life event, because they are challenging, they are difficult to navigate. But we've also got this thing called injury. That's a sport-specific one. So we have these negative life events, and then we have sport-specific, e.g. injury, e.g. not coping with being little fish, they now have to be in a much bigger pond. So yes, we do need to be aware, keep an eye on this. And some athletes will navigate injury well. Obviously they're disappointed. Who's been injured here has had a reasonable injury and not been disappointed? Just go, yoo-hoo, I've got an injury, yippee, yippee. I don't think it kind of works that way. Is that fair? All right. So so that's normal. That's in the normal range of things. Of course, you're going to be disappointed because we've got goals. We want to move forward on our goals, and an injury interrupts that goal progression. Okay. But if we start to see, the athlete's got an injury and they then start on their rehab and then they stop doing their rehab, it's a change in behaviour, okay? Then we need to intervene and find out what's going on. And we need to ask, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this is a really good example, an injury one, where it's the difference between normalising and pathology. Normalising is, yeah, of course they're going to be disappointed. Pathology is actually their mood starts to decline and then it changes their behaviour, and so they stop going to rehab and then they decide to quit the sport and so on, and you see a change in behaviour. We've got a problem. We've got a problem. The psychology of that in terms of how to manage that, when you're dealing with an injury, key thing is to get to not just the physical hurt, but the psychological hurt. So if there's a physical hurt, I've done a hammy, it's a grade 3, might need surgery. That's tough enough for them. But then it's like, but I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm never going to get to the Olympics, or I'm never going to make the state team. I'm never this. Okay, that's the psychological hurt. So you've got to find out what the psychological hurt is, and then try and talk to the athlete around about that psychological hurt. What can I do to help you? Okay? Remember, this is short term. You'll get back. There's been lots of other athletes that have been injured who come back. Same as some athlete who's used to coming first all the time. We try and normalise it. One thing to take away from these particularly is to use what we call the I understand but. I understand you're really disappointed about the injury. I really understand that that it was hard for you to lose that race. I get that, because everyone wants to keep training and everyone wants to keep winning. That's really normal. People want to win. That's really normal. Totally understand where you're coming from. So I understand. It's also called empathy. Start with empathy, start with validation. I understand, but There's no way we're going to get to your goals unless you get to your rehab. And I know you can feel like it's a long way off, 6 months out of the sport. I think that's going to be forever. And for a 13-year-old or a 14, that is forever. It is forever. Just as a little subset of that discussion, think of it this way. If you add up the number of months between, say, 6 and 18, right, so that's 12 years times 12 months, 144 months. Divide that 3 months or 6 months into 144, it gives you a figure, all right? If you take that as an adult and you're 6 months out of a lifetime, 6 months out of a lifetime is always much smaller than 6 months out of 12 years. So for an athlete, 6 months is forever in their context. Not in our context, but in their context it is. So we've got to be really compassionate. Athletes are used to coming first, 100%. Good athletes are used to doing that. Understand, start with the I understand. Yeah, that must have been really hard. I get that. Like, you know, understand that you could see yourself coming second and so you pull back on the reins. That was a common one to see. So mate, I can see what you're trying to do. You're trying to, so you can say, well, if I didn't try hard, it can cushion the blow. It's called self-handicapping. All right, very common. You see it a lot in particularly high-performance athletes. It's like, mate, I get that. I understand that that's what you're trying to do. I can see that. But it's important that you bust through. You finish off the race, even if you know, hard and fast as you can, even if you're going to come second. So it's I understand, but. Use the I understand, but is to navigate some of the quite tricky issues that can occur. Any thoughts on that? Question?
I know, in a coaching perspective, you happen to see an athlete or someone achieving goal.
Yep.
And, as a coach, at what stage can you come in?
Yep.
And are there any strategies you can tell?
We come to that. Bottom line though is changing behaviour. You see a change in behaviour, it's time to just in a gentle way. Yeah. I'll come back to this exercise. To do the simple things, sorry, I'll get it right eventually. Right, if you notice, one of the simple things is to say, are you okay? All right, but we're going to come to that. But it's see a change in behaviour. You see a change in behaviour and it's repeated. It's not just a one-off, we all have bad days. You know, we all have a moment where like you just don't train your best. Who goes to work and works perfectly, evenly throughout the whole day without the odd period of time where you feel mad? I don't think anyone does. It's just not possible. So we all have moments, but if you see a change in behaviour and it's significant and it's repeated, or even if it's really significant and it's really significant, we need to step in. Change in behaviour. Something's a little different. So, things that we're trying to look for in terms of behaviour, notice a change, is the things that they say about their intents, about their own physiology. I'm really tired, I've just got no energy. Or their own behaviour, I just can't be bothered. Or I just feel really flat. Right? Well, let's say the flying one. My body is feeling absolutely sensational. I'm really loving coming to training and I'm just like, this is so exciting. I'm really loving it. And I really love the goals you're setting for me, coach, and I really want to engage with these goals. And see a consistency between what they say and what they do, then we're probably going to say to the athlete's fine. Athlete's going really well. So we pay attention to what they say about their own physiology, their own behaviour, their mood, and in what they say about their engagement with goals. And then there's a consistency between what they say and what they do. We can then describe the behaviour. We can then notice when there's a change. Okay? What I'd like you to do now is with a partner, right one day, is I want you to just have a quick chat in pairs, threes, I don't care, it's not school. What are some of the things that they say about their own behaviour, own mood, goals and training, particularly around when someone's really struggling? Okay? 2 minutes, just with a partner. Question?
So what if the first four is happening, but the last one is different from what we're talking?
Can we discuss that in a minute? Can you hold that question? Because that's a really good question. So let's start with what they say. Okay? But being mindful of also what you see in terms of their behaviour. What they say. What they say. Nah, I'm good, thanks, mate. Yeah, going well. Thank you, sir. Okay, guys, how can we tell if someone's really struggling? What are they saying about their physiology? What are they saying about their body and their biology and their physiology? What are they saying about that? What are they telling you? Okay, about their body and their physiology. If they're really struggling, what are they telling you about their physiology? Feeling tired, sore, lack of energy.
We're on that.
Yeah, listless. I just feel tired all of the time. So it's not just a one-off. It's like I've been noticing this has been going for a while. What about when they say their behaviour? Bit withdrawn. I'm feeling like boss. I think I'm coach. I think I'm just pulling back a bit. I'm kind of noticing I don't really want to come. Turning up late, okay? That's the do part, okay? So what are they saying about their behaviour? Can't concentrate. I find I'm coming late all the time, coach. I don't get it. Sorry? Yes, the loss of interest. But I think I've sort of, and that's a bit of, there's a crossover in their goals. I've sort of lost a bit of interest. Often also I don't understand. I don't get it. They're often kind of don't really understand why. What about their mood and their affect? What is sort of how they're describing their mood? Sluggish. Yep, sluggish is a good word. Unmotivated, yeah. I just have lost my motivation, lost my mojo. I haven't got that energy, that motivation. Again, there's a crossover there between physiology and mood. What about their engagement with goals? What are they saying about that? I can't achieve, it can't be, it's too hard. It's just too hard. I'm just not getting, I'm just not there anymore, okay? And if we see a consistency between what they say and what they do, okay, and we've seen that change in that behaviour, it's like, time to intervene. Now, what happens if we get your question? Can I ask you a question about your question? When you say if there's a consistency, it's easy. It's like, okay, we've got a consistent story. When there's not consistency. What was the, which was the lack of consistency? Was it they say it and then they don't do it, or other way around? Yep. No, lovely, thank you. When that's all positive, coach, I'm really into it and I'm really excited, and then you see the behaviour that's not, pay attention to the behaviour. Pay attention to the behaviour. Okay? In the ideal world, we get a consistency between what they say and do, and it's a very clear picture. When there's a difference between what they say and what they do, we've got it's a more complex picture. But there's a fair chance behaviour is the thing. That's the telling the story, right? So what that might mean is if they're saying they're really engaged but they're not doing it, it might be because they're embarrassed. They don't want to let you down. So they tell a story that gets you off their back. Okay, gets you from stopping. Because if you feel, oh no, they're saying they're really, really good, it's all sweet, everything's going well. So what happens is most coaches then in that context start backing off. Whereas what we really need to pay attention to, if we get the consistency between the two, it's easy. But if you pay attention to the behaviour. Okay? So does that answer your question?
Yeah, kind of. So I had this person and the top four is and when she does right, 4 days it's perfect, or for 2 days. And this is ongoing thing for 9 months. So we had physios, we've changed physios to better physios, to small physios, had a small doctor, all her blood tests, because she wants to run. Right? She says, oh, I want to do this, this is who I am.
Yep.
But she will have one run and then the next day comes up. And the physio says, the mom doesn't want to take it to the psychologist. The physio said that it's now so bad that she believes she's got pain in her legs, that she's got stiffness. There's absolutely nothing in here which she gets to.
Now we're getting into more complex territory, where particularly when an athlete wants to be there but it's not going on and it's not working, we're probably dealing with some physiological issue or what they call psychosomatic issue. And they're often quite tricky to work out. And it could be genuinely that you always got to deal with the physiology first. You know, if their thyroid's out, they're going to be lack of energy. If their iron levels are low, for most female athletes, but sometimes happens with male athletes. So they can have all the enthusiasm in the world, but they just don't have the energy. So you've got to deal with the. Sorry. Yep.
The female is a low hormone phase, high hormone phase.
Yep. Yeah, so different aspects of the different points of the menstrual cycle impact on the levels of energy. So you've got to really focus on the physiology, but it could also be psychosomatic. There could be some other more deeper psychosomatic issues going on, but it's a very complex. But I think always start with the physiology. You've got to. If I've got anyone who comes in with me to see me for burnout, I say, I'll send you to. Actually, I'll give you an example. I'm dealing with disorders. I've got to GP, and I've got to get all your bloods organised. I need to know what's happening before I can do any psychological work. Okay, so yeah, we've got to deal with the body first. It's a variation on the mind-body connection. Okay, but point of this exercise is I want you to be able to at least begin to inquire about being able to describe what's going on, so you get a sense of if that changes, then we need to pay attention. Okay? When to talk, we're looking for a change in what they say and do. If it's small to moderate changes, it's okay to watch and wait. That's okay, because sometimes if you see a little change and it's happening regularly, it's kind of like, you might let it go for a little while, or you might say, mate, I just noticed your training's a bit off. Are you okay? So we don't have to watch and wait. Sometimes that's okay too. This is where you've got to use your judgment. Now, what I'm trying to do today is to give you some more knowledge so you make that judgment. Okay? But if it's small to moderate change, we can watch it wait. If it's significant, we genuinely need to move ASAP. When talking to an athlete, if it's a non-situation, take some time to prepare. Go and talk to someone. If it was happening, and Geesh and I worked at Waste for a little while, if it was happening in strength and conditioning, it would have been good for Geesh to come and talk to me and say, Craig, I've noticed this athlete saying X, Y and Z. Okay, And so I'd say to Keisha, like, make sure, just when you're chatting to them, just keep it really simple, mate. If it's just checking if you are you okay? You know, that's preparing, right? Go and talk to someone. And when you actually talk, keep it really simple. I think the are you okay movement's got it spot on. Keep it really simple. Mate, are you okay? Just been noticing you seem a little bit off. Are you okay? What are the don'ts? Please don't promise confidentiality. As a clinical psychologist, I can't promise total confidentiality. So if I can't promise it, you can't. And there are too many stories where coaches say, it's all confidential, I don't have to say anything. It's like, no, that's not true. It's legally, that's not the case. Also, professionally, it's not the case. If an athlete says to you they're going to harm themselves, you can't keep that to yourself. Because if you do, one, it's not bad good for the athlete, and two, legally you put yourself at risk. So therefore you have to say to the athlete, no, there's a lot of stuff you can keep between you and me, but there's a couple of things we can't. And you tell them before they start disclosing. So you don't promise total confidentiality. Don't do that. And don't get angry. Athlete comes to see you, you hear horror stories about other coaches. Oh, how dare you bring this to me now? You can see I'm really busy. Don't do that, okay? Please. So we've said this is all very nice. Let's do the do's and don'ts and are you okay? Keep it really simple. However, still a lot of people find it difficult to take those proactive steps. And that's a couple of reasons. Often if I'm the coach, I might fear how the athlete might react and therefore I won't say anything. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. Sometimes athletes will just fully deny, particularly eating disorders. They will say there's no problem. In fact, they'll even gaslight you. They'll even say, what? Something wrong with you? Are you crazy? Something wrong with me? And so some coaches therefore don't go there. So it's a fear of how the athlete might react. And also there's a lot of shame that athletes, I feel they should be coping, etc., etc. Fear of not being selected. If I say I feel I'm depressed, some coaches in some cultures, in some environments, sporting environments, will know that means they won't get a game. And so they won't disclose. So there's a number of triggers there. Also, for the helper, we often trigger by our own experiences. If they're talking about depression and you've been depressed in the past, it's like that triggers you, and therefore you don't want to go there. So we've got to see you've got to be compassionate for the helper too. But if we keep it really simple, are you okay? Then it's not as daunting as it possibly can feel. There are exceptional circumstances. Key thing here is make sure that when you hand over, I'm going to harm myself, I just can't cope anymore. Don't just send them home in their car, or just don't send them home by themselves. Get someone to take that person off your hands. All right. Number one, it's the right thing to do. Number two, it's also a legal issue. So, and there's just a couple of emergency numbers. So I encourage everyone to keep them in their phone under ICE in case of emergency. All right, in case you just go straight to your phone at ICE, you got those phone numbers. Hopefully you never get to use it. I sincerely hope you never do, but it's nice if you have to. This always happens. We've run out of time to actually talk about this bit. I'm giving you these, please have a look at this handout around about that. Actually, the coach can play a preventative role. This has been a reactive role, most of the stuff we've talked about, how to react, how to tell if there's an athlete wellbeing issue. But we can actually do a lot as a coach and as a teacher, high school teacher for 20 years. We can do a lot to make sport a safe place and a good place and a place that's away from some of the stuff that goes on in their lives, okay? And we can do that by fostering closeness, right? By encouraging being a long-term commitment, being sort of cooperating and sort of working out common ground. If you can do that with your athletes, then you are going, according to this theory, you're going to not it's not only effective coaching, but it's also going to be good for their well-being. So we can coach for well-being as well as high performance. And that's the key point of that slide. We can coach for high performance and well-being, and that's very possible. That's an important thing. Whereas some of the old school theories is kind of like, we're not coaching for well-being at all, we're only coaching for high performance. So that's a problem, but we can do it together. Also, sport and being active is a great opportunity to meet some of these greater psychological needs. So for example, developing, there's two theories of it, but fostering autonomy, which is choice, competence, encouraging the development of competence, and also relatedness. If we can do that, that actually fosters well-being. What does it mean by, for example, autonomy? Encouraging athlete choice. So as they get older, for example, get them to try and choose what's in their warm-up. That's encouraging autonomy. That's encouraging choices. And if you do that, instead of sport being another environment where they have to do what they're told all of the time, no matter what, which might be their environment they grow up in, they've actually got some choice. It's got to be guided. You know, as a high school teacher for 20 years, I wouldn't allow a year 8 to have the same amount of choice as would do a year 12, right? In a high school context. So it's guided and it's got to be thought about, but choice is really important. When we have greater choice, we have greater well-being. When we have greater control, e.g. less choice, we have less well-being. And there's just up to a couple of areas of well-being as well that are really important, e.g. security, express, opportunities for spontaneity, learning about self-control. So just in summary, these have been the core questions we've tried to address. That is, what is the role of the mental health professionals in helping an athlete that needs some form of assistance? Also, what can we do to promote well-being? We've probably spent most of our time focusing on question 1. And that's okay, that's what we needed today. But I wanted to make sure that we cover some of this other stuff as well about not just reacting to well-being, but how to promote well-being, because we definitely can do well-being and elite performance both in the same breath.